Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I was a foreign fighter in Afghanistan between 2010 and 2012. I was part of a unit consisting of other foreign fighters like myself, mainly Tajiks and Uzbeks, that traveled from province to strengthen local mujahideen against NATO when needed. We encountered plenty of strange things during our time in Afghanistan, but for now I'm going to focus on one event in Farah province. Before I start with the story, I'll just give a short description of some of the guys in my unit who were involved in this story. There were two Chechen brothers, Umar and Imran. Both of them were around 6'3" tall and heavily built, their favorite hobby being working out. They were the friendliest of the bunch. There was a Tajik called Salim, who was very quiet and shy. He didn't talk much, but he was a nice guy and he always had my back. Our commander was a Pashtun called Gulyan. He was competent, but he didn't really lead the group. He just helped us coordinate with the local Pashtuns. The real leader of the unit was an Arab called Khalid, but we always called him Al-Gharib, the strange guy. He was the bravest and most intelligent of us all. He was always perfectly calm no matter what the situation, and always cheerful too. He always knew what to do and lead us through thick and thin. All of us looked up to him. What was strange about him, you ask? Khalid was only 14 years old and looked it. Imran told me he was from an extremely wealthy family in Dubai, which he ran away from. None of us knew how he got approved to join the unit, but we were glad he was with us nonetheless. So we had been in Farah only 3 days. Amir Gulyan had met up with the local commander, and we had been allocated houses in a small village to stay in. We were told there was a US outpost 15 miles away, which we were to jointly attack with local mujahideen the next morning. We spent the day cleaning our weapons and fooling around, wrestling, playing volleyball, on Khalid's advice. Everyone needs to be relaxed, he said. Khalid and I were playing volleyball with Imran and Umar, while Salim sat a little apart from the other Tajiks reading. Umar was just teasing Khalid by asking where his dress was. Khalid was a handsome little guy and had once been captured by ANA soldiers and made to do bachabazi, that is, dressed as a girl and made to dance for them while they got high. When Gulyan returned and told us it was time to get moving, as it was starting to get dark. We were to hike to the outpost in the dark, approaching from the eastern side, observe until dawn, and then attack. At the same time the local mujahideen were to attack from the west. We had 30 men, they had 74. The hike was easy. We'd done similar plenty of times before. One thing worried us, and that was the lack of radio chatter. We couldn't make contact with the other group. Eventually, Gulyan decided to take a chance and use his mobile phone to call them. They couldn't make it because of drone activity, so we were on our own. Usually we would have pulled back and waited to attack another day, but we had already sighted the outpost and it was tiny. It didn't look like it could hold more than 10 men. It was nestled in the ruins of a fort and surrounded by trees. As we were hidden in the trees and deliberating whether we should go ahead with the attack or not, we heard shouts coming from the outpost, and then the sound of gunfire. The only people who could speak English were Khalid and I, so everyone started asking us what the Americans were shouting. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but Khalid said it wasn't English but Spanish. This was our first encounter with what we would later call green card soldiers, poor people from Mexico and South America who were promised green cards in the US if they did a tour in Afghanistan or Iraq. They were always poorly trained and they were never counted as casualties by NATO. Their bodies were never removed from the field unless we buried them, which we did whenever possible. Anyhow, 7 of these guys ran straight into us. They looked shocked to find guns pointed in their faces, but they surrendered immediately. I began asking them if they spoke English, but they were in shock and on top of that afraid of us. Eventually, 2 of them started speaking in broken English. They told us that they'd been stationed there a few weeks, but that it was a bad, dark place. They kept repeating that over and over. They said that one of their friends who didn't like it the most started acting odd, not talking to them and staying alone. That night, while he was on lookout with another guy, he went crazy and stabbed the other guy. They heard the noise and came running out to find him mutilating his friend's body on the ground. At that point, they heard noises from deeper inside the old fort and then ran away. One of them hurt himself with a gun and left behind, which explained the gunfire we heard. We tied their hands and searched them while Khalid began telling everyone what they had said. After Khalid had related what had been said, everyone concluded that they had got drunk and fought between themselves. Everyone except Gulyan. He had cousins from Farah and said that scary stories were often told about the many ruins that dotted the province. Stories about witches and demons and stuff like that. He wanted to leave the area and take the soldiers as prisoners. Khalid, on the other hand, wanted to investigate the outpost and said that it was unlikely the prisoners were worth much because they weren't American or European. After Guljan's stories, no one wanted to go near the outpost, especially not Imran or Umar, who were terrified by spooky stories even at the best of times. Only Salim and I said we'd go with Khalid. I was sure it was just a drunken argument, and besides, I was ashamed that only the youngest of us was brave enough to explore the enemy outpost. Khalid, cheerful as ever, began making fun of Imran and Umar by saying they could borrow his dress any time. Knowing that he would never let them live it down, they decided to come as well. The rest of the unit said they'd wait for us until we came back and mind the prisoners. At around 3 a.m., the four of us approached the outpost. The place looked empty, but we weren't taking any chances and entered cautiously with our weapons raised. The lights were on and a radio could be heard playing Western music somewhere further inside. Before going inside the main building, we walked around the small compound and found the machine gun nest facing outside the base. There we found two bodies, one of them brutally slashed and cut all over. The other had a slit throat and a completely blank expression. It looked like a drunken argument that went too far. Khalid bent down and was delighted to find some video game thing in one of their pockets. A PlayStation. Not sure what it's called. He said something about finding a charging cable and ran off. Salim said he was going to follow him and secure the rest of the compound, while I was trying to imagine how the fight had happened and explaining it Umar and Imran to calm them down. I was just telling them how it was probably a drunken brawl when I noticed something strange. The big knife used to murder the badly cut-up guy was lying on the ground, and a fellow with a slit throat was holding another small knife in his hand. I started thinking that he had cut his own throat and began to feel unsettled myself, but I didn't mention it to the other two because they were scared enough already. I decided we should move away from the bodies and explore the main building, which was connected to the fort. As soon as we entered the building, I began to feel nauseated. Despite the music playing, it seemed deathly quiet, and every movement we made seemed to make a lot of noise. The place was dirty, smelly, and very cold. I tried one of the doors, but it was hard to open, as if there was something in the way. I pushed through and found another body. It was blue in the face and had black marks around its throat. There was also a clear puddle underneath it which smelled like urine. I was going to call Imran and Umar to come in when I noticed its fingers. The nails were broken and they were covered in blood, and on the back of the door there were marks like he was trying to scrape through the door. At this point I knew something very bad had happened, and thought maybe that he had been tortured by his comrades. As I stood up to leave the room and rejoin Imran and Umar, the music stopped. I quickly walked into the hall and found them standing where I left them. Neither of them had turned off the music, and they were frozen in fear looking in the door of another room. Just as I was about to ask them what was the matter, the lights went off and the banging started. It sounded like hundreds of hands were pounding the walls, and they were increasingly fast and violent. At this point, we grabbed each other's hands and ran outside as fast as we could. We ran to the entrance and found the other two. Salim had made himself a cup of tea and Khalid was sitting on the ground playing his video game. We quickly told them what had happened, and all of us agreed that there was probably some truth to the stories of Guljan. Despite what we had said, Khalid wanted to go inside the main building. There was no way Imran and Umar would go back, but since Khalid was adamant and said he would go alone if he had to, I went with him. I was afraid, true, but I was as curious as I was afraid. Khalid was as cheerful as usual and his presence calmed me. I held his hand and the both of us walked back to the main building, where the lights were on again and music could be heard playing. This time, as soon as we entered, the music stopped, and it became even colder than before. I thought I could hear faint whispers ahead, but Khalid continued on pulling me with him, as if nothing was out of place. I had lost my nerve and couldn't move on my own. All I could feel was panic, and there was a horrible tight feeling in my chest, stopping me from breathing properly. Khalid headed for the room the other two had been staring at and walked straight in. This room was closest to the old ruined fort. The whispers seemed to grow louder, and I completely lost my head and turned to run, but Khalid said wait, and I was rooted to the spot. He laughed, and immediately the whispers stopped and the atmosphere lightened. I looked out the window and saw the beginnings of dawn. Khalid walked over to a sink, began washing his hands, and said, "Looks like it's time for Salah." Prayer. After all that had happened, prayer seemed like a good idea to me. So we washed ourselves and set our coats down to use as prayer mats. We said our prayers as usual, with Khalid leading the prayer. As I stood up from sujood, prostration, I felt someone breathing down my neck, but I followed Khalid's example and continued the prayer as normal. By the time Salah was over, the feeling of dread was entirely gone and nothing felt out of the ordinary. After finding nothing of interest inside, we walked outside and found the other three just finishing their prayers. We collected 5 guns that had been left behind, and on the way out found a shipping container filled with snacks, drinks, and a few boxes of ammunition that we had missed in the dark. As we left, we heard the radio turn back on. We made our way back to the rest of the group, and Gulyan immediately started interrogating us. I told them that it looked like a drunken brawl had gone too far, and that 3 of the invaders had killed one another, but said nothing about what else had happened. Gulyan knew by the look on Imran and Umar's pale faces that something odd had happened, but they wouldn't talk to anyone. We woke the prisoners and started the trek back to the village. Khalid and Gulyan walked a little ahead of the rest of us, obviously discussing what had happened. The rest of the unit tried questioning us on the way, but soon gave up. Everyone was gloomy and uneasy, except Khalid, who kept poking fun at the Chechen brothers and chattering about the game thing he found. The prisoners were handed over to the local mujahideen, and from what I heard afterwards, released to the local arbakas a few days later. Umar and Imran never spoke about what had happened again, and never told me what they saw in that room. I'm a foreign fighter in Afghanistan, and I posted a story here a few months ago. It received many negative responses. However, recently 1 or 2 people here mentioned my story and seemed to remember it fondly, so I promised them I'd post more stories. Hopefully they will see this thread. I'll be typing these as I go, so please be patient. This story, like the last one, took place in Farah province. It was a quiet day with little to do, so I decided to take the 3-hour walk from our camp to the nearest village. I asked a few of my friends and other members of the unit if they wanted to come, but everyone was feeling lazy and claimed to want to organize a game of volleyball. My buddy Khalid asked me to bring him some biryani cooked by a widow from the village. She liked to treat him and acted like his mother because of his age, so I agreed and headed off to the village. It was a fairly hot day, so the walk seemed to take forever. When I got to the village, I felt a sense of disappointment. I took such a long walk to get there, and it was as quiet and dull as camp. I bought some ice cream and, finding nothing more interesting to do, visited the widow to get some biryani for Khalid. Her brother welcomed me into their tiny house without even asking why I came, and put out some tea and biscuits for us to eat. We discussed Khalid, the hot weather, and debated on how to prepare the perfect pot of tea until the widow herself came in from the little garden. The old man introduced me to her, and she instantly guessed why I came. After forcing me to eat more biscuits and drink another round of tea, she gave me 2 boxes of biryani, and after thanking them, I took my leave. I left the house and started walking down the road, only to see that the American puppet army was setting up checkpoints all around the village. This was a surprise, because we are well informed and usually know what those idiots will be doing before they do. It turns out that our commander did know and told Khalid to tell me, but the cheeky little snot forgot to mention it. I took a roundabout path to skirt the village and eventually came to the path into the mountains where our camp was. Skulking around the village had cost me time, however, and it had begun to get dark. What was worse, I could hear a drone humming faintly in the distance. I hurried along the path, and after only 30 minutes, I managed to trip on a rock and sprain my wrist. It wasn't likely that I'd come across a patrol where I was, but I worried that I wouldn't be able to defend myself. While I was busy thinking about my sore feet, my poor wrist, and the long walk ahead of me, I lost my way. I walked for another 2 hours before I realized that I wasn't going to make it to the camp that night. I started to look for a safe and relatively comfortable place to sleep, and thankfully found a clue almost instantly. Over the humming of that drone, which had grown louder, I could just make out the sound of trickling water to my right. I slowly made my way towards the sound, being careful not to trip and fall for a second time. As I got closer to the stream, I heard a second sound that I couldn't quite make out. Then I heard a third, the sound of something splashing in the water. I froze and pressed myself behind a large rock in the hope of seeing what was ahead of me before it saw me. While squatting behind the rock, the second noise I'd heard came closer, and I realized that it was someone humming. Curiosity overcame me, and I immediately stood up and began to walk towards the source of the humming. It was very strange to meet someone this far out at this time of night, when decent people were in bed. As I got closer, I could perceive the outline of a frail and bent body walking through the stream. It was clearly an elderly person. He was wearing old clothes so patched that I couldn't make out the original color, and a turban so tattered that it hardly could have kept the sun off his head. I strode up confidently and said, "Are you okay, Granddad? It's very late to be out of bed. I'm a mujahid under Amir Guljan, and can help you home if you want." He turned and looked at me as if not at all surprised that I should be there, smiled and shook his head, and continued alternately humming and grumbling to himself. Imagining that the old man was deaf, I stepped closer and repeated myself in a louder voice. Again he looked at me, and again he didn't respond. It seemed as if he were senile and gotten lost. I took his arm and led him out of the little stream, as wet feet in the middle of the night wouldn't do an old man's health any good. He followed me without complaint, and I gently pressed him to sit down opposite me under a nearby tree. While I was wondering what on earth I was supposed to do, he suddenly looked up at me and said, "What about some biryani?" I was astonished to say the least. How could he have known I had biryani when I myself had forgotten it, and forgotten momentarily that this was Khalid's fault and that I was going to get him back? I was too tired and sore to think hard about it, and decided that he must have smelled it or heard the plastic boxes bumping in my bag. "That's not a bad idea, Granddad," I said while opening my bag and handing him Khalid's box. I decided that it was safe enough to use my torch, which I hung over us between two branches. Before eating, the old man raised his eyes to heaven and muttered. I didn't hear him, but assumed that he had said Bismillah, in the name of God, which we commonly say before eating anything. After I said Bismillah, he began to eat, and for the next 10 minutes we sat enjoying our odd midnight picnic. After our meal, I lay down and stared up into the sky. The old man sat as he was, occasionally mumbling to himself. At one stage, I made out the words, "Love is from God and of God and is God." Not expecting an answer, I asked if he was a Sufi, a mystic or hermit. He didn't respond for so long that I thought I wouldn't get an answer, but eventually he said, "I'm an idiot like you. Come and see what another fool's house looks like." He got up laughing, and with more speed than I thought possible of him, tottered off into the darkness. I jumped up, grabbed my torch and my bag, and ran after him. Somehow he'd managed to put 20 feet between us while strolling at a leisurely pace. I caught up with him, and 15 minutes later we came to a small grove of trees with a brightly lit house in the center. Before entering the house, the old man stopped at the door and said, "Peace be with you." Old people always say this when entering a house, because our beloved prophet said that an angel watches over every home. I repeated the words and followed him in. The first thing that struck me was how bright and clean the house was. I was surprised that a seemingly senile old man could keep his house so clean. I wondered if he had a wife, but almost as soon as the thought crossed my mind, I saw the only other room in the house which had no door, and which was furnished only with a single pillow and blanket. The fire was roaring, and the old man handed me a teapot, a box of green tea leaves, and a kettle full of water. I hung the kettle over the fire and prepared tea, while the old man took 2 silver cups from his sleeve and set them in front of us. At this stage, I was more than a little curious. I was full of questions and struggling not to let them come pouring out. We sat in silence sipping our tea, and I began to feel tired. The house felt so cozy, and the sound of the fire seemed to relax me more than its warmth did. I wanted to ask questions but felt incredibly tired. The old man just stared at me, sipping his tea, smiling and shaking his head. My memory is poor from that point onwards. I can remember that he started talking to me in a friendly yet serious tone. I can remember that we spoke for what felt like a long time. I can't remember what it was that we spoke about. The only thing I think I can remember is him saying that wisdom is just a kind of remembering what you already know, but don't know that you know. At some stage, I fell asleep. I eventually woke up with a stiff backside and a full bladder, so I walked outside the house and the little grove that surrounded it to relieve myself. When I came back, the grove seemed a little thicker than before. I walked through it multiple times but couldn't find the house. I eventually spotted something propped up against one of the trees, which turned out to be my bag. I opened it and found 2 boxes of biryani that were still warm. I couldn't accept that the house had vanished or that I had hallucinated, so I searched for over 20 minutes to no avail. I said my morning prayers, thanked God for keeping me safe for the night, and then walked back in the direction of the stream I'd found the night before. I found the rock I'd crouched behind, but there was no stream. I walked for hours until eventually I came to the road to the village, and I then backtracked a little, headed down the correct road to camp. After all that walking, and with almost 3 hours walking more to go, I started thinking about my poor wrist and my poor feet again, only to realize that my wrist hadn't bothered me all morning. It wasn't sprained anymore, and the cuts and bruises on my arm were gone. It didn't surprise me after what had happened over the night, but I couldn't help feeling deeply thankful to that old man, whoever or whatever he was. When I finally arrived back at camp, everyone was amazed to see me, none more so than Khalid when he discovered I had his biryani, which he only got after getting 10 punches on the shoulder in exchange. They'd heard about the checkpoints the day before and had assumed I was recognized and picked up. I explained that I got lost after taking the long way around the village and that some old man had put me up for the night. I didn't mention any of the strange things that had happened. The commander might believe me, but the others would call me a hashish smoking crazy until the day I died. I asked a local fighter, a nice guy called Karim who operated a heavy machine gun, if he knew of any old man living in the wilderness nearby. He told me that in his father's time such a man had wandered among them moaning strange things, not knowing day or night, not troubling himself for food or work or shelter. People shared food with him, but never replied a word, or talked aloud, except when abroad by himself or alone in the wastes. He hadn't been seen for many years and it was assumed that he'd died. That's the end of this story. If people want, I can come and post again later on in the week.
Hearing a drone. Drones cannot be heard and are very hard to spot. What group do you fight for? I sympathize with some insurgents of Afghanistan, not a supporter of the war, but others leave a lot to be desired with their methods.
You can hear them when they fly low. Sometimes they fly low back and forth all night over farms and villages to prevent sleep and cause fear, and also to prevent people from wanting to shelter us. I'm with an autonomous group of foreign fighters that supplements local soldiers of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. We pledge allegiance to Amir al-Mu'mineen Maulawi Haibatullah Akhundzada.
So you're an insurgent. I know and understand why Afghans are fearful and hateful towards the West. I've read my history. Nonetheless, I am not a supporter of the inhumane tactics rebel groups often use, nor the jihadist ideology. I must ask, are you an Islamic extremist or are you simply motivated by the Afghan plight? By your own admissions and your English proficiency, I can tell you come from some English-speaking country in the West.
I'm not a Salafi, if that's what you're asking. Do I support the strict enforcement of Sharia in Afghanistan? Yes, but it's likely not what you think. I don't support attacks on foreign countries. I wouldn't classify myself as extremist, and neither would anyone who knows me, nor would I classify anyone I know as extremist. I've never treated any enemy combatant or prisoner poorly, and I've never seen one treated in a way I wouldn't like to be treated myself. I'm opposed to groups like ISIS and their ideologies, and have fought them. I came to Afghanistan because the warrior spirit of the Afghan people impressed me.
This is a subject that has been weighing me down for years. It's 2 a.m. where I'm living and just took sleep medication about 3 hours ago, but nothing really works. I haven't been able to sleep normally since finishing out my service. The only reason I'm posting here is because there's no way for anyone to trace it back to me. But I want to mention every non-human, non-animal thing I saw. I was part of the last Marine unit to do patrols out of a patrol base before tearing it all down and handing it to the Afghans in 2014. I went back around 2018 to Kabul, and never really saw much because I stayed in the FOB as a contractor that second time. 2014 still had a fuck ton of action. A lot of murder and kidnappings in the local community. So I have a feeling something otherworldly was summoned there. Here's what I saw one. Imps. Little mischievous fuckers around the size of a thumb and dark-colored. They like to steal small things like crackers and other things from MREs. Most of the ones I saw were on the walls. They're usually fast, but I guess you could catch one if you wanted. I never tried. 2. Tree spirits. Usually around a clump of dead trees. I have no idea what they do or their intentions other than spying on people and being a creepy fuck. The tree spirit is obvious because in a bunch of trees it's the only one with a face, arms, and moving around. Other than that, it mostly looks like a tree. 3. Tree giants. This is why I ended up making this post. I heard of the giant of Helmand and happened to see giants in the area too. But the ones I saw were totally different. They would avoid mobile convoys, the sounds of vehicles. These things have hair that look like the leaves of trees. They are the same height as trees, but they have a fat human body with fat feet and fat arms. They move pretty slowly. Weird to see, but not really scary. I think they just want to be left alone. 4. Demons? The only demon I saw came to me in the middle of the night. This requires a little backstory. Every 4 weeks we would go to Camp Leatherneck to fix our gear, shower, and take care of things like that. So instead of sleeping with an entire platoon in one tent, we had 4-man rooms with concrete floors. One night around the middle or later in my deployment, a pale white demon ghost came up through the floor and stopped around torso level just so I could see his head looking right at me in the room. He said things like, "Life is constantly revolving around me and sometimes the nightmares become reality." Gibberish like that. There was a blue circle around the body with words I didn't recognize, and then he disappeared after noticing I was still awake. 5. Lion Man. So one day our dipshit platoon sergeant got lost. This guy was a boot on his last combat deployment and did nothing until this one. We had a ton of vehicles, so they needed a lot of room to move. But this guy managed to get stuck in the middle of a city center with nowhere to go around like midnight when everyone was sleeping. I was on the upgun and using night vision goggles, so it was my job to keep an eye out for threats. I saw kids and not much else. Until I noticed a tall man in a pure white robe, which is uncommon where we were. The man dropped to all 4 legs, turned into a tiger, and ran away ultra fast. I couldn't fucking believe it. A moment later, the entire community is outside our convoy and pulling at the storage compartments on the side, stealing everything inside. We couldn't shoot civilians, so the sergeant did the next best thing and shot a pop-up flare at one of the motorcycles, and then another one at the kids, and then another one at anyone else nearby. The motorcycle fucking caught on fire. We left. Nobody talked about that at all because it was a misuse of flares and property damage.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.